Hey, welcome back to the GRC homework series. Your company's security is only as strong as the security of your vendors. If one of your third-party partners suffers a breach, it can expose your customers' data, damage your reputation, and even lead to regulatory fines. Today, we're diving into third-party risk management, TPRM, to understand how organizations assess vendors and reduce risks in their supply chain. Let's rewind to 2013. Target, one of the biggest retailers in the US, suffered a massive data breach that exposed 40 million credit and debit card details. But here's the kicker. Target itself wasn't hacked directly. Instead, attackers gained access through Fazio Mechanical Services, a small third-party HVAC vendor that had weak security measures. That one vendor connection allowed hackers to infiltrate Target's network and steal customer data. Key takeaways from the Target breach. Fazio Mechanical did not have multi-factor authentication, MFA, on their vendor access. Attackers stole their login credentials through a phishing email. Once inside, they moved laterally across Target's network, accessing payment systems. Target did have security alerts, but they were ignored or not acted upon fast enough. This is exactly why third-party risk assessments exist, because one weak vendor can bring down an entire company. Now, let's see how we prevent this from happening again. Now that we understand why third-party risk is critical, how do companies prevent another Target-style breach? It starts with a vendor security risk assessment, a structured process to evaluate the security posture of any third party before granting them access to your systems. The 3 key steps of a vendor security risk assessment. 1. Collect vendor information. Get details on how they store, process, and protect sensitive data. 2. Evaluate security controls. Check for critical protections like MFA, encryption, logging, and compliance certifications, SOC 2, ISO 27001, etc. 3. Determine risk level. Based on their weaknesses, classify them as low, medium, or high risk. Let's walk through an actual example using our vendor, MediBill Solutions, a third-party billing provider for a hospital. We'll analyze them just like a GRC analyst would. Now, let's analyze the answers from MediBill Solutions' vendor security questionnaire. Here are some of their responses. They use single-factor authentication, SFA, not MFA. They lack endpoint detection and response, EDR. They have SOC 2 Type 2 certification. They encrypt data in transit, but not at rest. So what does this mean? Let's break it down. No MFA? That's a red flag. Without MFA, stolen credentials can give attackers direct access. No endpoint security? That's another issue. If malware infects a vendor's laptop, it can spread into our environment. SOC 2 certification? That's good, but it doesn't mean they're fully secure. Encryption only in transit. Data at rest, stored data, is still vulnerable if an attacker gains access to the system. Now, using this information, we need to classify their risk level. Are they low, medium, or high risk? Now that we have all the security details, we assign a risk level to MediBill Solutions based on 2 factors: likelihood, how likely they are to be attacked, and impact, how much damage a breach would cause. Final rating, MediBill Solutions is a high-risk vendor. Since they have critical weaknesses, we should not approve them without stronger security measures. Our next steps require them to implement MFA and endpoint security. Ensure they encrypt data at rest. Limit their network access until they prove security improvements. Now it's your turn. You'll act as the GRC analyst assessing a new vendor. Using the vendor security questionnaire and risk assessment template, analyze the security posture of a fictional vendor and determine if they're a low, medium, or high-risk partner. Before jumping to conclusions, take time to understand the vendor's role and risk profile. Ask yourself, what type of data does this vendor handle? PII, financial data, health records? How much access does the vendor have to internal systems? Do they process, store, or transmit sensitive information? Are there any immediate red flags in their responses? No MFA? No encryption? If this vendor has access to highly sensitive financial data but doesn't use multi-factor authentication, MFA, That's a big risk. If a hacker steals their credentials, they could log in without extra verification. That's exactly how major breaches happen. Here's a tip. Focus on critical security controls like authentication, encryption, monitoring, and incident response. Now that you've identified weaknesses, it's time to prioritize risks based on their likelihood and impact. Ask yourself, likelihood? How likely is it that this weakness will lead to an attack or security incident? Is this a common attack vector? Impact. If this risk is exploited, how severe would the damage be? Data breach? Financial loss? Regulatory fines? Does this vendor have compensating controls in place? Do they have alternative protections, like network segmentation? If this vendor does not encrypt data at rest, the likelihood of an attack depends on whether hackers can access their storage. But if breached, the impact is severe because unencrypted data is fully exposed. Assign a risk rating: low, medium, high. High risk: critical weaknesses that could lead to major security incidents, for example, no MFA, lack of logging. Medium risk: moderate weaknesses that need improvement, for example, outdated encryption but some security in place. Low risk: minimal exposure, strong security controls. Another tip: if a vendor has multiple high-risk issues, they should not be approved without remediation. Now, this step is about translating your risk analysis into a business decision. Ask yourself, what are the biggest security gaps in this vendor's profile? What are the most important recommendations to reduce risk? Should this vendor be approved with conditions, or rejected? If this vendor lacks MFA and incident response but has SOC 2 certification, I might approve them only if they implement MFA within 30 days. However, if they also lack login and encryption, I may recommend not approving them until they fix these issues. Last tip: keep your report concise. Focus on the risks, their impact, and clear next steps. You just worked through a real-world GRC decision. But here's the big question. Would you trust this vendor with sensitive data? Did you approve them? Did you approve with conditions? Or did you decide they're too risky? This is exactly how GRC analysts protect companies from third-party breaches. It's not just about checking boxes. It's about critical thinking and business impact. What was your final decision? Drop your answer in the comments. Like and subscribe to keep building your GRC portfolio. New hands-on assignments. Next up, stay tuned for next week. See you in the next one.